Good morning, church. I am so excited to be here with you this morning. Thankful to be able to bring a word from the Lord this morning. Most of you probably know me, but I would imagine there's a few who hasn't, because it's actually been 3 years since our last furlough, so quite a bit of time. But my name is Justin Thompson. My wife Allison and I and our 4 kids were missionaries in Lima, Peru for 11 years. That's right, I said we're missionaries. It was April 21st that we moved back to the United States after we passed on church leadership to our Peruvian brothers and sisters. So we've been navigating this time, I think, for 67 days of going through cross-cultural transition here in the United States. But this church, the Littleton Church of Christ, has partnered with, lifted up, sponsored, loved, cared for, and listened to my family. You are our partnering church. And I would emphatically say that in our time together over these last 8 years, you have tended to the presence of Christ as you have tended to my family. You and your relationship with us has been very meaningful and significant for our family during this time on the field. So the first thing that I really want to do this morning or say this morning is thank you to this church, to this body of believers. There are no adequate words to say thank you, to express our gratitude for your faithfulness over the last 8 years since June of 2012. The second thing I'd like to do this morning is to share with you some stories of God's faithfulness, because I think it's appropriate that we celebrate the work that God has done in and through us these past years. And I emphasize us, because I want you to hear that this is our story. This is y'all's story. This is my story of what God has done through us in Lima, Peru. And I also want to share with you the stories of 2 individuals in Lima, Peru with you today. But before we get there, I would like us to hear the words of Jesus in Matthew 8, verses 18 through 22. Here we find Matthew's version of the cost of what it costs to be a disciple. If you are able, I ask that you stand for the reading of God's Word, as is our custom and tradition here at the Littleton Church. I will read the words in white, and I ask that you all read with me the words in yellow. So please stand. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." The word of the Lord for you, and you may be seated. Those are some strange, perhaps rare words from Jesus to 2 comments made to him. And I want you to reflect a little bit about how you felt when you heard those words. What did you feel in your gut? What did you feel in your heart to the answers that Jesus gave to those 2 statements? He says, so one of the teachers of the law comes to him and said, "Lord, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus looks back at him and says, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." And you can kind of internally hear Jesus saying, do you understand that? And then another disciple comes up and approaches him and says, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." And Jesus looks at him and strangely says, "Follow me. Let the dead bury their own dead." And it's strange and perhaps perplexing of what is Jesus saying here? So what did you feel in your gut and in your heart when you heard those words this morning? Perhaps you were confused or perplexed, like, Jesus, what's that supposed to mean? Perhaps there was a little bit of fear or maybe feeling scared. Following Jesus might lead to feeling displaced, where I don't have a place to lay my head. Or perhaps you're kind of taken aback. This feeling of, what do you mean? I can't have closure with my Father? I just leave everything and follow you? Or perhaps you're inconvenienced. What do you mean, Jesus? I can't put my affairs in order first before I come and follow you? Or perhaps you're turned off because I won't be displaced, will I? That doesn't really apply to me because I can just come back to Jesus when I'm ready, can't I? And so you have this really odd responses to these two statements that these two individuals made. Or perhaps you kind of felt sad because you realize with these statements that is a high cost to pay. Because really, there is, in theory, it's easy to do this, to leave everything and to follow Christ, but in practice, it's pretty hard. So the first person that I'd like to share with you this morning is my dear friend Brian. And a few of you here at the Littleton Church know Brian. Chris DiCillo, Kent Wiley, Tim Kelly spent 6 Sundays last fall listening to and encouraging Brian. He's a young man who attends the university. I met him about 6 to 7 years ago. I don't remember exactly when, and we became acquaintances on the soccer pitch. He's really good. He's light years better than me, hands down, no questions asked, and he's usually the guy that's picked first on the field, whereas I'm usually one of the ones picked last. That is, of course, unless I'm picking the teams, but that's a whole different conversation. But what grabbed my attention from the very first moments of knowing Brian was his humility. You can say that for as good of a soccer player is that he's flashing, he has really good moves, but really his personality is very simple and humble. When he's on the court, he's fluid, he's in control, he can dish a good pass, or he can take control with dynamic precision. But in the midst of it all, he's got this humility. And so over the past 5 years, I've studied the Bible with Brian in different seasons. And as I sat with Brian, I learned his story. I learned about his family. I learned that his dad died just a few months before he was born. I learned that he struggled and really continues to struggle with a God who will allow evil to exist, this idea, or with a God who seems to allow unjust suffering to fill the world around us. And these doubts, these questions, they're very real for him, but they put up an obstacle that hinders him from handing over his life to the one who is capable of giving life. You see, I know Brian is a good person with a good heart, and Brian asks lots of really good questions, and he really struggles with his doubt. In the midst of that, I've always been amazed at his persistence. I've been surprised so often that he shows up time and time again because I really believe that he's found a place to belong within our faith community, that there's something there that continues to attract him despite the fact that he hasn't completely given his life to Christ yet. So coming back to Matthew 8, which of course comes after the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And here we come into chapter 8, and it's the first stories are filled with great faith and healing. They're filled with casting out demons. So all the cool stuff, which very clearly sets the scene for what we see here in chapter 8, verses 18 through 22. This teacher of the law says, Jesus, you name it. Wherever you go, I'll go, because if you keep doing the things you're doing, I want in. I want to participate in that. And, honestly, who wouldn't? To see Jesus doing the things that he was doing, you'd kind of have to, be a little bit blind to not see what was going on. So it's very natural that what we're seeing here in verses 18 through 22 was the scene being set. But for Jesus, this discipleship thing is not about participation in the way you might think. For sure, God calls us to be present, to participate. He calls us to show up. But it doesn't stop there. He wants you, He wants me, He wants us to go the distance. He wants you to place Him at the highest place. He wants the priority in your life. He wants the highest priority because only then will He be able to truly transform your heart. And what's beautiful here is that God places the ability to choose Him in our hands. He doesn't rip that away from us. If in my choosing I only give God a part of my life, a piece of the canvas that is my life, His work on the transformation of my heart will be limited because of the pieces that I still choose to maintain control over. If, however, I choose to give Him the entire canvas of my life, only then will the work in me be truly His. Therefore, this discipleship thing is not about participation on our terms, but on His. And He wants all of you. He wants all of us. So I look at my friend Brian, who's still searching, still hung up on the cost. But really, I have hope. I have hope that he'll see and hear and choose to follow Jesus. And I don't think that that's really that far off. I have hope that he'll come to see Jesus as the one who gives life to all who choose to follow Him. Then there's Giselle. A few individuals here at the Littleton Church know Giselle, Jennifer Kellogg, Candace McGinty, Kira Hufford. Spent 6 Sundays last fall listening to and encouraging Giselle. Giselle is Venezuelan. She's a bright, intelligent, compassionate, and joyful individual. When she first moved to Lima about 2 years ago, she met Lucero, who's one of our Christian sisters in Lima, who has very evangelistic giftedness. And Lucero reached out and welcomed Giselle with open arms. And it was through Lucero's invite that Allison and I met Giselle and began listening to the stories of how she moved to Lima from Venezuela because of the political and economic turmoil that is troubling her home country. Giselle was not the first person that I had met trying to make a life in a new place. However, her experience and watching her grow through adversity left an impression on my family and on me. Giselle was displaced. Literally, she was without a place to lay her head. In a way, she experienced the hospitality of strangers. So often in my life, the hospitality I have received has come from the hands of people that I have known, or at very least from someone with whom I share a common connection. She moved from her home country to support her family back home, coming to Lima not knowing anybody. And while she would probably tell you that she adapted to life well in Peru because of her love for new cultures and new things to some extent, she was still living as a foreigner in a strange land. Giselle has endured hardships that I find difficult to imagine. I have certainly never experienced life in the same capacity as she has. Not long after arriving in Lima, Giselle started studying the Bible with Allison and a few other young ladies from church. And Giselle realized after just a short amount of time, really just a few months, that she needed Jesus. You see, for Giselle, leaving family was really hard. It still is. She traveled to Lima with her sister. However, for her, it's hard to escape the feeling of being displaced. For someone like Giselle, the idea of the Son of Man having no place to lay his head takes on a different meaning. It's significant in ways that I can only imagine. So what's the difference between my two friends? One struggled and struggles to hand his life over to Christ, while the other has not had that same struggle. Both have considered the cost. Both still, in some ways, count the cost. Jesus, when he says following him comes at a cost, he's not joking. He's not bluffing. He's being real. This is a big decision. He knows that unless he has all of you, he really won't be able to change you. In other words, if you choose to follow Christ, and I mean daily follow Christ, then you will find yourselves in places where you might be displaced, where you might have to learn who you are, learn about your identity in Christ. You might feel a little bit out of place. I think Christ wants us to learn, and perhaps slowly learn, that your identity, my identity, our identity is not in our holes or nests. In other words, not in the things that we have created for ourselves. It is not in what we do or you do or I do or what we create with our hands. It is in who we are as followers of Jesus Christ. It is in what he has done for you, for me, for us. Making this a little bit personal, by very, 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 very small comparison, I myself am going through a season of displacement. Physically, yes, I have a place to lay my head. God has provided shelter for my family during the season of cross-cultural transition. Really, the place that I currently lay my head comes from and depends on the hospitality of others. For the past 67 days, I have laid my head in a place for which I have not paid. I have depended on the hospitality of others. And by the way, this is not a sermon for support, but rather to emphasize the nature of discipleship. As I hear the words of Christ in Matthew 8:18 through 22, connected to my context of displacement, I am forced to consider the consistency of my identity. What gives me my identity? What gives you your identity? Is it my family? My wife? The health of my marriage? Is it my kids? My kids' academic success? Their athletic success? Perhaps my job? The success of my job? The failure of my job? The success of my company or my workplace? Is it my record? My intellect? My intuition? My friends? The list goes on. So my question for us this morning is, where is Jesus? Really, in an honest way, where is Jesus in your life? And I'm not looking for the Sunday school answer, because really, with that question, with that answer, nobody ever wins. We only take a step forward when we honestly evaluate and answer the question, where is Jesus in my life? Does he take priority? So, maybe right now, as you're thinking about that question, you might find yourself somewhere on this spectrum. Maybe your answer right now is, he doesn't take priority. I like control, and it scares me to give too much up. Or maybe you're saying, I haven't invited him into my workspace. I haven't invited him into my marriage. I haven't invited him into my home. I haven't invited him into my fill in the blank, for whatever reason. Maybe you find yourself somewhere there. Or maybe you're on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's there, and you've learned to let him into your workspace. You've learned to let him into your family, into your marriage, into other spaces of your life. And I think the important part is to be honest with yourself. Where are you? Because this text today really is intense. What is Jesus saying? And I think we see that he wants us to make him our priority, not over something, but over everything. So church, no matter where you find yourself on this spectrum, I want to say today that we all need each other as we submit to Jesus Christ. I'll say it again. We all need each other as we submit to Jesus Christ. So I want us to do something today. I want us to make a decision. Let's make a decision. And I use those words, let us, because I don't think this is something that we need to do alone. So many times I think during this pandemic we feel alone in spaces where is my community? Where is my family? And there's still the call to make Christ priority, to give him priority in our lives. And so I challenge us today, as you sit with your family, or as you sit with perhaps by yourself, or you sit with a group of friends, no matter where you sit, to consider this question: where is Jesus in your life? Because again, I'll say it, we all need each other as we submit to Jesus. My prayer for you, church, for each and every one of you, whether you find yourself in deep peace with God or struggling with him or somewhere in between, that you'll make the choice this day to give him the entire canvas of your life. I urge you to follow him first. I implore you to see the promise he offers to live in and through you, to give you life to the fullest. And church, I'll end this where I started it. For 8 years, this church faithfully loved and supported my family. You lifted us up. You prayed over us, and you listened to our stories. God has done and will continue to do great things through our partnership in the gospel. I am convinced of that. And I implore you during this season to continue lifting up your brothers and sisters in Lima, to lift up people like Brian and Yisel as they learn to navigate church life without foreign missionaries. And I beseech you not to forget them as we remember what God has done through us. Church, may you have a blessed week. And may you step forward in faith, reminded of God's faithfulness, reminded of God's goodness, and compelled to share your faith with other people. Let's be a church that loves God and goes out to love other people. God bless.